welcome to the Huddle Breakdown. I did have to think about that there. I'm such a podcast harlot these days. I don't know what I'm on and what I'm not. I'm joined as always by James and Alan. My name is Laura Bradburn. Alan, I'll come to you first. How are you doing?
Hi, okay. I think I'm feeling a bit on an island of one at the moment and not running around panicking, throwing my arms in the air, trying to look for my pitchfork. But never mind, we'll get into all that, I'm sure.
We will. That's essentially what this podcast is. It's me coming in and screaming down the metaphorical phone at you guys, and then you calming me down. But we'll see how that goes. James, how are you doing?
I'm just rejoicing in the use of the word harlot. That is an all-time great that does not get used enough these days. So thank you for that. You've made my day.
I read a lot of Charles Dickens as a child, so I don't know. It must have been mentioned in there a few times, I'm sure.
We need to reference some people named Gertrude and some other old-timey words. It'd be wonderful.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
The length of the Dickens novels, I suspect there's not many words in the English language that weren't actually used at some point. So I'm pretty certain harlot would be in there.
That's true. But yeah, we'll save that for the book club podcast, which I'm sure everybody will look forward to.
Well, we're going to have a harlot poem, I think, on Thursday. So thanks for that. I'll make that my mission. The harlot of Parkhead.
Parkhead. People will be expecting something of me. I'm going to the Dundee match tomorrow, so I'll need to keep a low profile. Alan, I'll come to you first. We will get into the transfer stuff. We will get into all that and the differences of opinion that has wrought. But before that, let's talk about the Motherwell match. So there is a specific incident in that match that I'm sure we'll all want to talk about as soon as possible. But let's get a little bit of an overview of the match first of all. What was your overall thoughts on the match away at Fir Park?
Yeah, I mean, glad to win, I guess, for sure. Glad to win, really. After a difficult European game, football is weird, right? Here's a game that was almost beyond sterile. I don't know what the next adjective is beyond sterile, but it was kind of getting in that direction, and then it ended in extreme emotion. So I mean, football's bizarre like that. So that was the most noticeable thing I think about the whole game, apart from just the way Motherwell played, really, which was just they were actually on track to set records for passivity at halftime. I think Celtic's passes per defensive action was over 15, nearly 15 and a half, which by the way I calculate it, which is different to how other vendors calculate it, would have been a new record in all the games I've ever worked it out at. But they kind of were less slumbery in the second half, and we were slightly less slumbery, I suppose, or different players took turns to be slumbery during the game. So it was typical post-European fare. We looked a tired team that was happy to do the minimum, I think, that was required to get the 3 points, and we did a bit more than the minimum in the end, which is nice, and we can get on to that. But yeah, happy with the 3 points. I think really good, given it is. I know Celtic have got a tremendous record there, but it is a tricky game.
James, Alan used the phrase there, a bit more than the minimum. Certainly somebody who certainly does a bit more than the minimum every time he plays is Daizen Maeda. He was an absolute machine again against Motherwell, and somebody who I think proves his worth more and more every time that he plays, and more importantly, actually, somebody whose absence is massively felt when he doesn't play. Somebody who I'm sure will miss going into the Champions League matches against Bayern, for example. What did you make of his performance throughout the match, goal included, obviously?
Yeah, I mean, he's having, with the exception of ball progression, which is not his strong suit, he's effectively matching Nicholas Kuhn's season domestically anyway. I mean, if you kind of look at the underlying data, they're remarkably similar as far as chance creation. I would actually argue his underlying quality is a little better. So he's, like his XG per shot is a good bit better. His expected assist per shot assist, when he sets up a teammate, the average quality of doing that is better than what Kuhn's has been. So I actually think he's underrated from a decision-making perspective. I think his decision-making is actually quite good. It's just those wonderful periods when the technical aspects of his game fail him, and they tend to fail him in abrupt ways and gloriously entertaining ways, as long as you're of a mindset to enjoy them. So yeah, this was one of those games where most of the technical stuff worked for him, and he was just really, really great. And now I will say, I'll echo something that Alan said. Like this is an example of a team set up in a way to basically let us have a free for all. I mean, the space in midfield, because of their passivity, they were kind of the opposite of narrow and compact. So it was, you could drive freight trains through the gaps they were leaving. And, so we just basically, even in our relative passivity, when a team sets up like that, of this relative disparity in quality, I mean, it's like a free for all. So there is that qualifier, but yeah, he was excellent. When you have all three goals you're directly involved with, really, really good.
Yeah, Alan, it was a strange one going into it, because as we like to do in this podcast, there's a certain amount of predictability that comes with some teams, depending on how they've played and who their manager is and what their form is like. Motherwell were in a strange situation where they hadn't been in particularly bad form that I was aware of anyway, and yet were without their manager for one reason and another. Do you think this made it a little bit more difficult to predict exactly how it was going to go down this weekend for Brendan Rodgers and the team?
Well, I had a couple of new signings as well. But to be honest with you, the other games we've played them this season, they have been very standoffish in those games as well. And I can't remember if they were as rigid in their 5-3-2 shape as they were, which, as James says, just made it so simple and predictable to play through them. One pass. I mean, all four defenders had over 100 completed passes. One pass took the front two out. That means you're then, with the fullbacks pushed on, you're effectively 8v8. The three in midfield are leaving huge spaces out wide. So, tiredness allowing, you're getting the wingers on the ball, although they didn't do a lot, but certainly the fullbacks were having fun, and the midfielders were having fun. Everyone took it in turns. I mean, Taylor ran the game from left back in the first half, and then tired badly in the second half. Hatate was tremendous in the first half and tired badly in the second half. Whereas Trusty and McGregor were kind of the opposite. They looked really sleepy and just not at it at all in the first half, and then both improved in the second half, whereas Nicholas Kuhn just looked absolutely shattered from his performance at Villa Park, where he spent most of the time running towards his own goal. As I mentioned before, marking their left back. I mean, he must have covered a tremendous amount of ground in that game, and he just looked dead on his feet. So, we had to kind of work around the fact that these players were taking it in turns, or were just really looking a bit tired and subdued really throughout the match. But there were bright sparks, as you say. Maeda was fresh, McCowan was fresh and had little sparks and little moments as well. Ralston was pretty solid, and obviously got another sort of on brand for him, good cross for the opening goal as well. So those little bits of quality were enough to see our way past what was, I thought, a really poor team, because not only were they very passive without the ball, on the ball, their passing was terrible. So, they're a mid-table side. It's a poor reflection, unfortunately, of the quality of the league. It really is, and especially the failure of the bigger teams. I mean, I can have sympathy with the likes of Motherwell, small budget, etc., relatively small club. I'm less inclined to be charitable to the Aberdeens, the Hearts, the Hibs, Dundee United, who get good 10,000 plus, near 20,000 plus attendances, and for years now have just been appallingly mismanaged and wasted millions in transfer fees and wages without putting together a coherent, plan. So, and I'm not being sour about it. People complained about Celtic and having this vast wealth dominating the league. Well, there is also an onus on other clubs to do better. And as I say, not so much Motherwell. They were poor, but some of the other clubs should be doing a lot better, really. So that was a bit of a kind of segue into transfer activity. But in terms of going back to the game and just finishing up on that, yeah, there was a bit of joy in the end. I mean, Jota brought the joy and brought a bit of life to the game with his cameo at the end. I thought he looked like he needed a bit of a haircut and a bit of a shave. I've got to get some Celtic Da comments in there. I've got to live up to that aspect of my my reputation being actually a Celtic Da. But no, he was great. He brought the joy, and he brought the tears as well, of course, at the end. And what an absolutely fucking appalling performance from Sky Sports. On that aspect of it, I was absolutely sickened really by Chris Boyd. Doesn't know any better, right? He's a fucking moron. He's an idiot. He's the village idiot. He's got no sense or sensibility about him. He even has the gall to kind of front up on men's mental health and then spout that shite. I mean, the man's a disgrace. Aidan McGeady should know better. The way that Aidan McGeady was treated in Scottish football, he should know better. I read something today. It was just his last word on the subject from me, really, is reading about a game in Spain. It was the other Madrid derby, so on the outskirts. I think Leganés, who I think Duke from Aberdeen has gone to, are playing Rayo Vallecano. Rayo Vallecano are amazingly sixth. I think they're the smallest club in La Liga, and they're up to sixth. They won in dramatic circumstances. They were 1-0 up, and then they conceded a penalty in injury time, and the goalkeeper saved it twice. It had to be retaken. And he's an Argentinian guy by the name of Augusto Batalla. Well, he's meant to be a bit of a character, and he's kind of a bit controversial sometimes. Time wasting antics and other antics and what have you. And he's a bit of a lively one. But he said after the game, he said, this is a quote from Batalla of Rayo Vallecano. This is there's a machismo that doesn't allow you to show who you are or how you are. Sorry, he said. The typical line is, "Don't cry," and the truth is that destroys. It's not constructive to not be able to express yourself, to not be able to say how you feel. So I thought on this weekend, from another game, this time in Spain, I thought those words were very apt.
I mean, I'm going to offer my thoughts on McGeady and Boyd after I get James's thoughts, but let's focus on the positive a little bit before we do that. James, the return of Jota has obviously been much heralded for a multitude of reasons. The idea that he would come back to Celtic had a romance attached to it that I think is hard to replicate with any other kind of transfer. But I mean, in terms of memories I have of being a Celtic supporter, I can think of very few that evoked the kind of emotion in me that I had when that goal went in. I sometimes, being involved in this podcast and lark and things like that, have to say to myself, it's only a game and it doesn't matter that much. And then ultimately it doesn't. We have things going on in all our lives that mean that football has to take second place, sometimes even much lower down in the list of things. But when you get a moment like that of pure elation, of pure joy, with nothing bad about it, nothing bad you could say about it, there's nothing like it, is there?
Yeah, the other retort I heard, it's to me just dopey. Not as Neanderthalish as the ones that Alan was referencing, but the trope about being well paid and these guys are rich, and he left to go to Saudi Arabia for all this money, all of which is true. But these are professionals, nominally, and I tend to try to take a charitable view on most people, and that they care, that they're good professionals, that they care about their craft. Particularly in the sports world, they typically are quite competitive people that they make it to that level. So the fact that he's had a rough 2 years away from a place where he was really beloved, almost like at a rock star level, and you get that kind of adulation. And let's not forget, professional footballers are part entertainers. That's why they all come in and kiss the badge, no matter where they're at, right? That's why the video of Kyogo at Rennes over the weekend, doing his thing with the new ultras and supporters group at Rennes. Like, this is part of the role. They're playing an acting role. That's part of the entertainment. Like, that's the WWE aspect of this. And we all buy into it. We all love it. But he's a human being, and there's a two-way aspect of that in enjoying being a performer, being in front of a crowd, getting that adulation. So he's gone 2 years, one of which was in an environment where, understandably, was a cultural shock, quite different living situation and very different playing situation. And then he went to France, where it just didn't kind of work out, and he didn't get really anything that he, and this is someone probably ambitious, looking to build his career, make strides. He's competitive. And, there's probably a bit of humility that went along with all this as well, because he wasn't able to maybe progress in the ways that he may have wanted or expected. So I get all of that. I mean, that could be very emotional, to return to a place and to get the kind of adulation that he hadn't felt, to do something that he loves, I'm assuming, really enjoying. He seems to be a joyful footballer. He's one of these guys that enjoys, he looks like he's enjoying himself out there. So to me, it was eminently human. And people that have a lot of money have emotions too. So, just because he's been successful in his career financially to date, I don't think that negates his humanity.
Yeah, I think to offer my opinion on it, just talking about Jota, first of all, I think, and this, I obviously don't know the guy and I don't know exactly, I can't read his mind, but I think I would imagine there's some kind of, that the symbolism of scoring that goal was almost a way to kind of fully underline and, if you like, to some extent erase some of the difficult times he's been through over the past couple of years, and help him fully realise that time is behind him. I'm sure he's learned from it in a lot of ways, both on and off the field, but I think he probably just felt, this is a fresh start, and that's what it symbolised. As for Aidan McGeady and Chris Boyd, Aidan McGeady was strange. He was trying to do this wee hard man act, which you see all over Glasgow if you grew up in this city. I'm sure it's not exclusive to Glasgow, but this kind of idea of his idea of what it is to be a man and how pathetic it actually makes him look when he vocalises it. And also he kind of had some sort of weird jealousy, I think, of the adulation Jota was getting, because I might be speaking out of turn here, but McGeady, I don't think, was ever as fully taken in by the Celtic support as some players before and after him. And I don't think has displayed the kind of love for Celtic after leaving that maybe might have ensured that happened. So his attitude was strange and disappointing. As for Chris Boyd, we've touched on it before. He's obviously got a history in his family of mental health issues, and is therefore a representative for mental health charities. I would sincerely hope that anybody watching that coverage at the weekend who in any way values Chris Boyd's opinion on anything did not take any heed of what he said, because I would hope that if you're in that kind of mindset and you hear who you think is an influential person telling you that the way you're reacting to certain things is not an appropriate way to react, it might stop you from speaking to somebody. And the message that we all say is, talk to someone, it's okay to talk, that kind of thing. And he just undid a lot of the good that he might have done by reinforcing that message. It would have actually been quite refreshing if he had opposed what Aidan McGeady said outright at that time in the studio, and said, I don't agree with what you're saying here. It's good to show your emotions. It's good to be vulnerable in that situation and let people see exactly how you feel when you're having a difficult time. That could have done so much for so many people watching. Unfortunately, neither of them took that opportunity. And it's disappointing to see that from a national broadcaster. But in some ways, it's to be expected. Anyway, that's me. I'll get off my little soapbox now. Alan, let's talk about much happier things. Celtic in a transfer window. To put forward my opinion on it, I'm very disappointed we haven't replaced Kyogo directly. I'm underwhelmed, to say the least, by the signing of Jeffrey Shlupp. We were talking about it before we came on air, and your opinion is, as always, a lot more measured than mine. What do you make of the reaction to and some of the hysteria that's followed the slamming shut of the transfer window and the fact that Celtic have done so little business?
Yeah, a bit excitable. I'm a bit taken aback actually by the
excitable.
The level of kind of well, maybe I shouldn't be. Maybe I'm just being really daft. I don't know. So let's try and look at these things in the round. So in some ways, it's a pretty typical Celtic transfer window in terms of what we've seen. Now, that in some ways is a good thing, in some ways not a good thing. So let's start with a good thing. So one of the areas that Celtic are very good and generally has been their ability to actually get players out the door. And again, there was a number of players that were sold. We've in terms of, as I kept banging on before the beginning of the season, is that before you start thinking about incomings, you need to really start clearing the squad of players that are just not contributing, not going to contribute very much. So players like Haksabanovic, Siegrist, Kobayashi, Johnson, Iwata, McCarthy, Shaw, Bernabe, they've all kind of left, permanently, and some money's been brought in, by the way. Whereas the likes of Tilio, Kwon, Lagerbielke, Welsh, Holm, Palmer, all kind of out on loan, many of them as the first step towards leaving, and actually some revenue generation has been achieved from the academy with Vata, Lowell, Kelly, and probably Josh Didi. I suspect there'll be some development fee involved in that, and that's on top of some sort of the kind of prestige, high value sales of O'Reilly and Kyogo as well. So 22 players have left the club. So that's really efficient, I think, and that's generally quite good business. The issue, but the other aspect of Celtic's transfer performance, which is predictable and not so good, is kind of on the incomings side. And I don't actually, we've got this far in the season essentially with a plan of Kyogo as striker and Ida as backup. And now we're going to go into the rest of the season with Kyogo and with Maeda and Ida as the two strikers. So I'm pretty sanguine about Maeda as a striker. I think I like Maeda as a striker. So I'm not calling that as being a massive drop off, if I'm honest with you. So that in itself isn't the issue, but it's more really the processes that are going on behind all this that I'm concerned about. And how we've kind of got to where we have. Because if you looked at the names linked and you looked at the processes that have been gone through, it just smacks of some of the old problems. So what are the old problems? Well, we're very slow. We seem to be reliant on some key, football agents in the past, and I don't see any evidence that is changing versus having a really smart, high-performing scouting operation. We seem to take an awful long time to do any deals. We seem to drive to the nth degree the need to be on the better end of the deal, and consequently just take an awful long time to get deals done. I'm sure there could have been something agreed with Arsenal and Tierney to get him in earlier, probably. But that aspect of transfer performance to me hasn't materially changed. It's still very much a risk-averse lawyer/accountant kind of mindset that's driving this, as opposed to a high-performance sports environment that's driving it. And then we come to the fact that it just seemed to be on the shoulders of Brendan Rodgers to come up with the names of players that we want to sign, either from his previous clubs or from players that he's previously had on the books. Now, that's not always a bad thing. And actually, I'm pretty sanguine about Jeffrey Shlupp. And I know he's not a Rodgers player, but he's someone that Rodgers knows well. I think he's a really good player. And I think with his speed profile and his, what he'll bring to the team in a physical sense is 10 years of regular Premier League player, right? He's played at that level consistently, and performed well at that level as well. So I'm okay with that as a stop measure if we couldn't get Tierney over the line. But what concerns me is that underneath really is that what did we have when Ange came in? There was he couldn't get anybody that he wanted, and he ended up having to get his mate Frank Dramboli in to get deals done, and that's what happened. It looks like Rodgers has had to do the same, and you're sort of thinking, well, what is the club doing? Where is? And I think, I'm sure there may be some leadership positions that you could question, but I've got just a fear that the football operation from a scouting perspective is just not fit for purpose. It's just lacking the talent and the ability to actually provide the manager with names that fit into a strategy that is evolving, and it has to evolve because of the pressures that UEFA sustainability rules now have on all clubs. And I wrote about this end of last week, and James in the comments added some more sensible context around how clubs need to behave. That you're in a situation now where you've got to keep your salary, your wage, what's called the salary control ratio, within 70%. Celtic got no danger of doing that at the moment. It's like 53%. But if you had 2 years of Europa League money, that would drop dramatically, right? In terms of your revenues would drop dramatically, and suddenly you wouldn't be 53% anymore. You would be somewhere around 60%, I suggest, if not touching in towards mid-60s, and then you're sort of thinking, it's getting a bit close. And you can't just drop players willy-nilly. Players are on long contracts, so all this needs to be thought out, and it needs to be planned against a budget that you think, well, I'm in the Champions League, surely I can spend this much. Well, as I say, you need to look at it over a sort of 3 to 5 year horizon and think, what's the worst revenue year we're going to have from a planning perspective, and then almost can we be comfortably within that ratio on that worst year? And that's going to mean that you're probably carrying some excess cash at times as well. So I'm not excusing the club. I'm just saying this is the environment that all clubs are having to operate in, and it's one of the reasons that. And again, I'm not making excuses for the club, but it was a very quiet window in England, especially, and because of the structural issues at Celtic, whereby we don't seem to be able to provide the manager with a list of names that are driven from an excellent scouting operation. Rodgers knows the English market, and the English market was very quiet. There wasn't a lot of churn there. It's the lowest volume of sales by value since 2012 in the winter market there. The other European leagues were quite active, but he doesn't know them as well. So we're back to this underlying structural issue again. So none of that is to excuse, but it is all important context, and it does all. Celtic don't operate in a bubble in that regard. So all these things do matter. But I come back to, and it's the same point we've been making on this pod for a number of years now, is that I just have no confidence that the quality of the people running the scouting operation are of the quality needed to provide what is an elite coach with a team and a set of players that can challenge at Champions League level. And I don't know what it's going to take to address that issue.
James, I guess my summation of how we work, and Alan sort of touched on it when he was talking about same club, same agent, same thing. It's a bit like watching Star Wars. Every time you get excited for a new show, they bring in one of the original characters, because regardless of how large the galaxy is, it's always a bit of Skywalker in the end. And that's how I feel Celtic operate in the transfer market. It doesn't matter how many clubs there are, how many players there are in the world. We pick from the same little crop of players attached to the same agents, the same clubs. The thing that refreshed us all about Ange, I think, was the fact that not only could he get business done quickly, which nobody apart from him seems to have been able to do in the Celtic job, but he went to markets and he went to leagues and he went to clubs that we had never touched before, and he brought his players that were on nobody else's radar, and surprised everybody with that. How much of our limitations are due to ones that we are self-imposing ourselves with, and how much of it is due to like the wider market and what's actually available to a club of our size?
Oh, I'm just throwing numbers out, but I'd say it's something like 90-10, 90% self-imposed. And this starts top down, in my view. We have a controlling interest or non-controlling interest that runs the club nominally. Is it plurality shareholder, whatever he is, Mr. Desmond, who has a Neanderthal view of the sport and how to run the sport, in my view. He's and I'm going off of his public comments on the record of relatively recent past, let's say the last decade. He has a very specific way that he wants the club to operate, and he incentivizes the people that work under him in order to operate in that capacity. And what that leads to, I'll use, again, coming from my world, so I'll throw probably a non-intuitive analogy at you. I know you're shocked to hear this, Laura, but one of the transformative aspects of Warren Buffett's timeline as an investor is when he shifted from being what they call a deep value investor, buying stuff that's dirt cheap. They call them the flea bag motels. It's not that it's a good company or good business. It's just really excessively cheap, and that he'll sell it later when it gets back to more of a normal value. And that can be caused by recessions and all these other things. What he ended up doing, and Charlie Munger played a fundamental role in this, was transitioning to investing in quality. So this is when he got into Coca-Cola, he got into the insurance businesses, and he got into, Apple eventually. And the problem with buying quality is it almost never is cheap on an absolute basis. You usually have to pay up for it. And I think what we're operating as is, and that's Dermot Desmond's mindset, the way he made his biggest money in the airport deal was as an asset stripper, deep value, distressed, asset investor. And you can make, obviously you can be very good at it. You can make a lot of money at that. That is not a growth mindset. A growth mindset is this 20-year-old striker or 21-year-old striker that I've got to pay $5 million for, which would have been Kvistgaard 18 months ago or 2 years ago, whatever it was. And we haggled on price then because we thought it should be cheaper and we didn't get the deal done. Let's just assume that's the fact pattern. Now that guy's, 13 million or whatever it is, 14 million. Well, it's a growth asset. He's getting better. He's in his development curve. And if you have this like deep value mindset in a growth market, which inherently, if you're trying to buy young talent in sports, they're a growth asset. Distressed is Shlupp. They've done a pretty good job with Shlupp. Like he's a guy on the downside of his career, coming off of a very high level. So I do like that signing. I think that's part of a diversification of how we can secure better players is to get older players in decline that may not be good enough still for the Premier League, but are more than enough good enough to do a job for us in a role. So I think it's a perception of the world. It's how the business is being run, and it's a mismatch above and beyond what Alan's saying, which is I fear that even if we did get the talent and the people in there that we're identifying and putting a list together of 2 to 3, we'd still be slow because I don't think the people running the club at the most senior levels have any idea what player values actually are because they're not modeling it. They're not measuring it. So they're saying this guy's worth $5 million. Well, where the hell are you coming up with that number? I think they're just making it up. They just have a number that they come up with that they think that this is what this guy's worth. And then they negotiate off of it. Well, that's crazy. That's crazy town. If you don't have some kind of market-driven pricing to give you a sense of what the value of the player is. And in order to do that, you have to measure what their performance is and what they're generating and then kind of model what that might be worth, not only now, but in a year or 2 or 3, based off of a reasonable development growth path. So that's how sophisticated modern sporting franchises across the world do it. And I don't think we're anywhere near that.
Sorry, James, to interrupt. I didn't mean to, but this is why, as well, specifically on Kvistgaard and actually younger players, the dynamics of the market now, the way it's pivoting under UEFA, especially in Europe, I'm talking about, is that actually, because you really cannot bump right up against that 70% wage ratio, you're probably going to be carrying a little bit of cash. Now, what do you spend that cash on? You spend it on younger players. Why do you spend it on younger players? Because you can bring them in on lower salaries. So you can have a better quality of player with growth potential at a lower price point than buying more experienced players. So there's now a surge to buy younger players, and because these clubs are having to be mindful of how much they're stressing either the profitability pillar or the wage control pillar. They've probably got enough money to especially in England, to pay a lot of money for these young players. And so to James's point, you might have decided that 5 years ago a 19-year-old from the Danish league was worth no more than 2 million. Well, that's not the case now because of all these external factors. It's actually 4 million now. So you need to be doing the market analysis to realise that. So I just wanted to kind of dive into that point, James, that you made there, because I think it's really important.
No, 100%. Somebody, I forget who it is, I wrote something about it and cited it on Twitter. It's probably a year ago, about this very market dynamic that was occurring, and that I had spoken about a while ago, because again, none of this is rocket science. Like, you just have to watch it how other professional sports leagues have evolved as analytics have been adopted, with baseball being the most prominent. But it's happened in rugby, it's happened in cricket. Like, these are sports I don't even pay attention to those sports. I know very little about them, but I've read and heard people talk about how they've had similar situations. So you have limitations, like whether it's an actual salary cap, like you have in the NFL in America or the NBA, or you have what is kind of a soft salary cap, which is what FSR is coming in to do. It's not saying you can't, go above this level definitively. And, obviously it's based off revenue. So you don't, it's capping in a way, but it's still rigged towards the big clubs. There's not, endless upside for people. So there's some limitation on spending. It's not this endless faucet of outside investors dumping money in, as obviously we're aware of certain clubs doing that. And when that happens, the way that this evolves is exactly as Alan says. There's a gold mine rush for young talent because of the issue. And then it becomes a bifurcated market. The top talent goes berserk, and, for 300 million going to Saudi Arabia, or, Man City's going to spend 200 million for this guy, whatever Vinicius is going to go for, Mbappe, what he goes for, that you get this wacky barbell that occurs. And then the middle class and kind of that, the older player, like 30 to 33, that's starting to go in decline. That's the one that ends up getting impaled. Because they're the ones that used to get overpaid based off their production, because no one was actually measuring any of this. It was all off of leadership and, all these other kind of narrative-based stuff and their past performance. Well, their experience, right? All these past, understandably, these guys build up 10 years of a career and a profile, and they get these huge contracts, and then teams would eat their decline. As sports evolve, and get smarter, that doesn't happen, and you get this bifurcation. So actually, a lot of the value is in a Shlupp, is in middle-aged players that are getting a little older, that aren't getting these buco contracts because of this occurring. Because a lot of clubs can't afford to pay. If you're an English Premier League club or a Championship, it's probably a better analog for us, like an upper tier Championship club, you can't afford that 27-year-old who's not an elite player. Maybe, like, you can't, have a bunch of those guys anymore because you're getting stretched. So you've got to allocate those resources because they're more limited. So yeah, it's this where we're kind of stuck, is we can't really compete on that growth market. It's gone beyond us now systemically. But we're supposed to be a player trading model. So how are we going to do this if we, can't identify that young talent and we're not in a growth paying up mindset? So I don't think we will. I think it will continue to kind of plod along in this mishmash kind of model.
Apologies for sort of harsh, like hammering in the point if it's essentially what you were coming at with, but when you think back to Martin O'Neill's days and we got Neil Lennon, Chris Sutton and John Hartson all for $6 million each, a player even of that calibre, late 20s, not getting into a Premier League team but having had all those years of experience, they would be astronomically larger figures nowadays that we would just not be able to afford. And what frustrates me about the targeting of younger players is that with financial fair play coming in the way that it has, a lot of clubs are trying to inflate the prices of these young players even beyond the types of figures you were talking about, because they see it as a way to kind of cheat the financial fair play system. So, for example, Man United selling, I don't know, Tom Collier in the next year or so, that would be 100% profit for them because he's an academy player, and therefore, he might have gone because he wasn't quite good enough for the top tier. He might have gone for, say, 5 million or something like that, and now they're going to push for 15 million because that's an extra 100% of 10 million they can get into their coffers and put on their balance sheet for financial fair play. So there's, on top of what you guys have said, there's a whole litany of things influencing what we can and can't get. But I guess my question then, Alan, would be, how do we operate in this market going forward the way that it's progressing? How do we ensure that we are buying players of the quality that we want to compete at the level that we want, not getting ourselves ripped off when we buy them, and then still being able to sell them for profit? Because trying to balance all those three aspects is something that's going to be very, very difficult going forward.
I think the buying the young players, and this is where I've always been slightly removed. Not I would have a different opinion to James, but just slightly different lens that I see it through. Is I wouldn't put all eggs in that one basket, because I think it's a saturated market. And like you've rightly said, Laura, teams have realised and are going to realise, because especially I'm talking about Europe here. So there's disruptors like Saudi League, the Chinese league a few years ago will crop up. The MLS may start to get more disruptive in time as well. So there will always be these disruptors where all the things that I'm talking about kind of go out the window, etc. But generally speaking, we operate in Europe, and that's going to be primarily where players are going to come from and go to. Is that clubs will recognise that these younger players actually have more asset value than perhaps they did, and it needs to offset the fact that, as we've just talked about, their older players, the 28, 29-year-olds, are going to have slightly less asset value than what they had because of teams having to be very mindful, especially if they're challenging for Europe. European places have to be very mindful of these salary caps, and players at 28, 29 generally are on much higher salaries. So if you take on a player at that age, you may not be able to demand much of a transfer fee as you could before, providing the other team can take on the salary, which you're then lumbered with for a number of years as you watch them decline. So that's the dynamics you've got to sort of juggle, really. So I don't know if it's too late in terms of the younger player trading environment, because I still think, especially in England, but I'm sure across Europe's big leagues, that the academy system is horrendously inefficient, and there's a huge amount of talent latent in that. I would have somebody, if not two or three people, whose jobs it is to be watching the Spanish Academy League, the German Academy League, the French Academy League, the English Academy League, the under-23 leagues. That's all they do, is just which will be watching constantly those markets and finding players of value. But I think, to James's point, so where I've come at this is I don't insist that the club has to be looking always at this sort of 16 to 20-year-old market. I think we should try and find efficiencies where we can, as I've just explained. But for me, it's always been about, and James nailed it, always been about finding value. You can find value in 32-year-old Jeffrey Shlupp. Now, he's not played a lot for Palace this season. I'm not saying he's going to be brilliant. I don't know. He has been very good in the past. He may be good again. But all I'm saying is, as an example, there's value in that. And therefore, as long as Celtic are finding value, I don't really care how old the player is, providing they represent good value for the club. And that's where it isn't about again, it isn't about who you know and what agents you use. You find value through being analytical, through being through putting the hard work in to analyze the performance data, to look at the financial modeling, to put it all together. You should have all these complex models. It's not just about looking at scouting numbers and performance data. It's about analyzing financial data, about how much we're going to pay this guy. What's the amortization look like? How, what we're going to end up paying? What's the total cost of ownership? What are the injury risks, etc., etc. All those things should be being modelled. All those things should be informing decisions about a player. It's not just about watching Y Scout videos. There's loads more to it than that. So so until we don't doing all those things, and therefore you feel confident that the player you're getting in, whether they be 18 or 28, represents good value, I've got no confidence that the club is performing optimally. And we've been saying this for years now.
Yeah, James, I guess before we start to round out the show, it all comes back to this one question. How do you think we measure up in terms of the quality and strength of the squad now that the window is closed compared to before it opened? I know what my thoughts are on that, but I would like to hear yours.
Yeah, well, so I think that this is where I'm not as fussed, kind of like Alan, in the sense that while how we got here is annoying, and we've been railing on about it for literally years now. So you get into the heat of the battle of last night, I get sucked up into it every freaking window, right? The analytical part of my brain gets flushed right down the toilet, and I'm just like everyone else standing there. Oh, come on, refresh. Something's coming. Yeah, I got my magic 8-ball out and I'm shaking it. Yeah,
that's what it's like. You're getting a wee taste of what it's like in my head every single day.
Oh, it's a scary idea. So, when you kind of step back and you take the context of where we're at and having a realistic expectation, I'm happy that we got 2 good players in. We haven't always done that. And I think they actually both, and I haven't completely finished my look at Shlupp yet, I will, but given his flexibility and his track record, I think it's reasonable to expect him to fit with us tactically pretty well. I mean, I can see him being an inverted left fullback in our system. That seems to be, an athletic upgrade on Greg Taylor playing the same role kind of thing, and to do it at least a functional, adequate level, which again has not been our track record in recruitment. So we one of the big failings we have is signing guys that don't fit our system. Trusty, for example, in my judgment, is so these 2 guys do, and they're both of a talent level which I think is knowable. The risk around them isn't that big. So I think the bigger risk, and this goes back to depth. I think the depth, and I'm not saying anything that the manager hasn't said. It's just kind of common sense. I mentioned before we went live, based off of the website, we've got 22 first-team players. That doesn't include Cummings. So if you want to add him, be 23. But that includes Bain, Forrest, who's out long-term injured. Hopefully he's back not too distant future. But and then you've got Kenny, who I guess is the backup striker, but we were trying to get rid of if we signed another striker, right? So you're talking about functionally like that core number that Alan's talked about in the past that the manager trusts and actually wants to play. 15 guys, right? I mean, the ghost of Mike Nawrocki's in there, right? So there's guys that he doesn't want to play. And so that's 15. That's 2 pulled hamstrings away from, oh boy, right? And this is where I get nervous, is because I think the risk around Jota is more, trying to come in and play, at an intensity level that Rodgers is going to want. Because I wrote a piece on Monday basically comparing peak Ange ball with I kind of tongue-in-cheek peak Brendan ball this season, because in a lot of ways it has been. We've been performing particularly in an attacking sense, very comparable to the peak period of 22-23 season under Ange before the split. And the pressing data, and we've talked about this, Alan knows this very well, pressing and counter pressing data is up. Like, we're much more front-footed, materially so, under Rodgers. So now we're throwing some of these guys in thinner squad, going to have to play more minutes, still playing twice a week up into March at very intense levels. Do we have risk of soft tissue injuries? That's my concern. And I would think, given Jota's last couple of years, he's probably specifically at risk of this because he's going to be kind of thrown into this without a preseason and just asked to go play winger in Rodgers' system with all of this pressing. And so I worry about that because, if we have Ida and one of Maeda, Kuhn, or Jota, two of any, those four guys go out with, a 4-week hamstring injury, then you're starting to see the real teeth get bared in the squad depth or lack thereof. So, I there are risks. I'm actually kind of sanguine about the quality of the squad. I agree with Alan. I'm fine with Maeda at striker. I actually think he's better in Rodgers' system at striker. Probably a few people that hold that opinion because of his lack of ball progression and what he provides there. So I say keep him central and let Jota and Kuhn do that on the outside, and keep Ida between the pipes like we've been railing about for a couple of months now. We finally did it for 2 games, so let's keep that up, and I think we'll be fine as long as we can stay fit.
Yeah, I was just going to say, hopefully Adam Ida won't get any hamstring injuries, because if he does what we've been saying, he won't move very far outside the 6-yard box, and he'll be there to
He shouldn't be sprinting
in.
at all, just dancing a little bit in between there. That would be preferable.
Yeah, let's Adam, if you're listening to this, just follow our lead, follow these 3 athletes' leads, and go with that. Alan, anything else to add to that? And also, what can you tell us about what's on offer from the Huddle Breakdown this week?
So, I think James said 15. At the risk of sounding pedantic, I would say if you looked at players that Rodgers would play not under duress, and I would put for example, Yang in that category.
Oh my God! I can't believe you just did that.
I think I know. I think we're down to 17. I think, but I'm not saying that's materially better. This is exactly where Postecoglou was at the end of his first season. He had 17 guys he felt he could trust, and he played them to death. And we saw some horrendous injuries: Turnbull, Kyogo, etc. I'm sure there were others that I've forgotten. And it's where Rodgers actually got to at the end of last season. He had 17 guys, that magic number, 17 guys that he felt he could really rely on when it got to, because that's, hopefully we're going to get to quarterfinals, semi-finals, league decider games that, you have to win to get over the line, all that kind of stuff. That's when you see who the manager really trusts. And we've got 17. So 17 isn't a lot in terms of absorbing. Now, we're not suggesting we go back to where we were. I've just listed 22 players have gone out the door. And, and rightly so in most cases, 22 permanently, and then another across the season, we've loaned out another 12. That's 34 players, they've gone out the door in various forms. If you get 17, and 17 is fine if you've then got 5 or 6 kids who you think, I'm okay to throw them in. If you think Dane Murray or and are going to come in and do a job and grow, and you're happy to play them on Wednesday night against Dundee and that sort of thing. That's great. But I'm not sure we quite have that either. So that's a whole nother conversation. But like James, if you look at the quality of the squad, I think, in fact, I would even argue that going from Maeda on left wing and Kyogo as centre forward to Jota on left wing and Maeda as centre forward, I would even argue that's a slight upgrade. I really would. I mean, you saw the difference just with Jota even coming on. I mean, I don't want to keep going on about poor Yang. He is what he is. He's not going to change, etc. And there's no harm in all the effort and what have you he puts in. But just the sheer quality of a half-fit Jota was just there for all to see in terms of what he did in those kind of cameo moments, in terms of how that's such an upgrade on what we had, really. So, and Shlupp, as I've said, I think is a even. I don't really know how he's going to be in terms of sort of touch and his kind of technical game, but he'll just bring a level of physicality we haven't seen on the left side for quite a number of years. So, yeah, listen, I'm kind of relaxed a little bit. Other than the structural things, which I think are the bigger, more strategic conversations, I'm I'm not getting my hair on fire about this deal or that deal or this player or that player, if I'm honest with you. But I think over the next, so we've got what have we got coming up this week? So yeah, we'll have a review of the Dundee game on Thursday. James and I have got to get into our schedule. We're going to do a special on the glossary's been published on the site. I know this all sounds very technical, but it's a lot of people who are into data understand that you need to understand what it is we're talking about, some of these terms. So James and I are going to be doing a special at some point, hopefully maybe put pressure on ourselves to do it over the next week, maybe by me saying this in public, to actually go through and explain some of these terms and some of the concepts as well, and kind of bring that to life a little bit. But we're working on other special guests and what have you that will occur throughout the year. So just keep listening, keep watching, and thanks for your support so far.
Yeah, and if you need any help with that glossary of terms, then just obviously give me a shout. I'll do my best. Or I could do that wee thing that they do in Tune the Fat, where you guys could explain it and then I could translate it for all the Neds, and we could do it that way. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. I'll certainly be tuning into that one whenever it does get recorded, because I need all the help I can get. Thank you very much, James. Thank you very much, Alan. As always, you have provided the therapy that has brought me down from high up in terms of my my outrage and my indignation at the perceived incompetence of the Celtic board. But I'll let you know how it goes, because I will be at the match tomorrow night. If any of the listeners see me there, feel free to say hello, or don't, if what you're going to say is going to upset me. Right, thank you very much, guys, and we will see you again next week.